Mihla.
I'll have to try to be long on this one and trying to explain it. But one thing that we must understand, in as much as I am doing law, you know that they are saying that the judiciary should act independently, the judiciary should not be influenced by politics and everything. But the question that we must always ask ourselves, is the judiciary not at the helm of politicians? Is the judiciary not conforming to the systems in terms of perpetuating violence? So that is the question that we must always ask ourselves, because you can remember that during Fees Must Fall, or even during all of the struggles that we have embarked on, the government has been using state agencies, militarizing campuses, bringing police into campus to suppress the student voice. So all of these state agencies, all of these institutions, they are perpetuating what the government wants to implement, you know. Also, another thing that is important in our struggle is that when we are embarking in these protests, we are not organized, we are doing things spontaneously. And it is something that I've tried with other comrades here at Forte to correct, to say that whenever we are embarking on a struggle, we must be able to understand that the inherent consequences of the struggle is being arrested, is being prosecuted for what you do, and you cannot there and then plan as to, you must plan as to how are you going to bring about a solution in that instance. And there are many lawyers that are offering pro bono cases. So you must have a legal desk whenever you are conducting that struggle, so that you can be able to get assistance. For example, here at Forte, we are working together with the Law Society that is based in Vincent here in East London, wherein we have a group of lawyers that are always on standby and willing to assist us. Because in as much as we engage in these peaceful protests, but the state agencies, they are given a mandate to come and provoke students, to come and beat up students who are peacefully protesting, and to provoke them. And you know that because of the intensity of the revolution, because of the anger of the students, they retaliate. Yeah, and then it ends up being violent, and students are arrested and so forth. And you have to prepare for such instances, wherein you must have your own legal desk and try to find lawyers that are going to offer pro bono services to the students. So that is what we have managed to do, and we have managed to arrange as the students of Forte. Also, there should be a shift. I'm not disregarding the fact that it's important for us to go on the streets, it's important for us to voice our grievances. We have placards, we have sit-ins and everything. It's important to do that. However, there should be a transition in how we do things. There should be a transition in us having to understand the law and applying the law in other problems that we are facing. For example, when students were evicted at Forte by the university because of the protest that was ongoing on campus because of financial exclusion. So the university decided to say, okay, let us evict all of them so that there can be stability, so that we can remain with those that have student cards, they can access the system, because all of the students in January, they were here on campus, registered or not registered, and we were all fighting. So they knew that when you send them back home, we are going to pronounce a date for them to come back, and those that do not have student cards, they're not registered, they're not going to be able to come back to campus. So they were trying to have a divide and rule technique. So we said, Dean, as comrades, okay, if the university is taking this route, we are not going to fight, because the campus is militarized. We are beaten by the private security that are employed by the university. we decided to say, let us take the university to court. We took the university to court and we won in that case. We did not pay anything in terms of legal fees because we were very organized. We got pro bono services and we were very organized in trying to do that. So it's very important to foster a new way of fighting, to bring in the judiciary in answering some of the political questions. I think it is something that has been happening in South Africa, wherein controversial political topics have been decided by the judiciary. So it's important for us to foster a shift in terms of fighting and being more organized in our revolution. However, sometimes it's difficult to do that. We must also be able to echo that it's difficult to do that because the government at times, or the institution at times, they deliberately lack policies. They don't want to create or establish policies. So they always opt for ad hoc committees in terms of dealing with issues. For example, at Fort Hare, there was an issue of gender-based violence that was happening on campus. Lecturers sleeping with students for marks. There was all sorts of things, but you cannot bring lecturers to book, you cannot bring students to book or staff members to book when the university is deliberately running away from creating such policies that are going to be a guideline for us, that are going to be able to stop the cycle of gender-based violence in the institution. So these universities or these institutions, they are deliberate in not forming these policies because they know that whenever there is a policy, we are going to enforce that policy. We are going to fight for that policy to be implemented on a grassroots level. So another thing that we must always try in fighting these revolutions is for the institution to have policies in place, for us not to have continuous struggles about the same thing year in and year out. We're talking about gender-based violence. We must be able to fight and say, if we are deciding to shut down the university must be at standstill for 3 months. If it's 3 months, we don't care. But we want the university to implement or to come with a policy that is going to address this problem so that we have long-lasting solutions to the problems that we are facing. And at Fort Hare, we decided to do that. We closed the institution for a month, and it is there and then the Senate and other university structures decided to approve the gender-based violence policy. So whenever you decide to fight the institution, you close it down for policy making. Then that is a means of having to try to bring about a long-lasting solution to the problem. Now we know that whenever a lecturer is found to have harassed a student, who have proposed that we must have sex for marks, we know that the police is there. And I'm very happy that there have been suspensions from the side of students, from the side of staff, based on that policy. So we must be able to fight the universities for creating ad hoc policies, committees, for creating quick fixes in trying to address long-lasting problems. Another thing that I've drafted notes in relation to this. For example, the issue of financial exclusion. In relation to financial exclusion, we know that all of these universities that historical disadvantaged universities, they don't have any plans in terms of addressing that. They don't have any policies in terms of having to say, what do we do with students that are forming part of the Ntsie? What do we do with students that are not funded by NSFAS and so forth? They are running away from having such policies. And you are always going to find yourself having to fight year in and year out because you don't have any policies in place. That is why we as the students of Fort Hare propose that no, there should be a student trust fund that is going to be guided by the university, that is going to be institutionalized by the university, so that we know that it becomes a guiding principle for us. We know that the SRC must donate 1 million rands from its budget, we know that the university must donate this much, we know that the university have to do fundraisers and so forth. It's guided by the policy that we agree on. For as long as we are going to have ad hoc arrangements in solving long-lasting issues, we are not going to succeed. So we need to force institutions to have policies. Whenever we are fighting, we must fight for a policy position. For example, at Fort Hare, there have been issues of suicides. Students are killing themselves. I think last year we had around 12 students that committed suicide. And what is the institution saying about those things? They are not saying anything. What is the policy position of the university in terms of mental health and mental illness? There's nothing that they're doing. All they do is to issue out a statement that we are sorry for the loss of the students and so forth. They are not doing anything. And part of us bringing about a solution to those problems is to say that let us have a policy that is going to address issues of mental illness, that is going to address issues of wellness within the student populace. So in us having to find permanent solutions, we must fight for institutions to make policies so that we can be able to fight for the implementation of those policies. Thank you.
What I really appreciated that a lot of what you said had to do with tangible results that were measurable and were solution-based. And what I'd like to hear from all of you, because I've heard a lot about, I'm actually quite inspired to hear a lot of the work that you've done, especially taking your university to task in a judicial system that can be very intimidating. So Qondiswa, are you there? I would like to hear from everybody since we're wrapping up and we're about to finish off the conversation. I know it feels like it's just started, but of course we can always continue this conversation offline. I'd like to hear from you what your vision for the future is and how you can see conversations like this that have shown us the similarities that exist, the very clear and deep connections that we have. How can that inform how we collaborate with each other between South Africa and the US? And what's your vision for moving forward? Qondiswa, if you're there, please just let us know, and then you can just jump in at some point. Who would like to start? Mbali, would you be okay with jumping in here?
Sure.
Or do you need a little bit more?
I'm trying to think. No, I think what I was gonna say, what I envision for the future comes from a place of cynicism, only because I was treated so badly by my school. But to be honest, looks like white people doing the work and just it not being me. Like that's literally what it looks like. It looks like dismantling the systems that they created. It looks like oppressive people and people in positions of power fixing it, only because I am the recipient of something that I did not start, yet I need to endure suffering. It just doesn't, it isn't for me. It isn't the perfect answer, I'm well aware, but it honestly looks like people just doing the work. That is their work, because I didn't create the issues, so I'm not going to clean up the mess. Similarly, it looks like people being paid for their labor and for their work, and that these conversations, as you put it, leave virtual space, because these conversations happen so much amongst these types of people, you know, people of color, people who are creating change, and the real change makers aren't in the room, the ones who really just hold the tools, because obviously we are so equipped to an extent, but again, it isn't us making the big decisions. So why are we the ones that have to continuously be lobbying for something that isn't? Yes, it's our own problem in terms of we are the endurers of that problem, but we did not create it. And so I want people to take accountability. That's what my vision for the future looks like. It's accountability and it's reform. It's absolute change. It's an eradication of a system.
Yes. And I think that accountability thread is very common between what Mihla said and yourself, holding people to account and making them responsible for their actions and decisions that actually affect a lot of people. Kaz, and then Anya and Hunter, if we can hear from you.
Y'all, first of all, this is blowing my mind. This is incredible conversation. So I'm just like seeing all of the radical possibilities now of like what can actually be done here in the States, and ways to empower us. I guess I'll first start in terms of my vision. I don't think what you're asking for is cynical at all, Mbali. Like, I think that's legitimate, and I think that can happen, and it's beginning to happen. That total revolution, and a call for a reimagining of what it means to be a student and to be a part of an institution, and to be a Black person in that institution. I guess as far as my vision is, I've been really, really concerned over the last year or so with healing as a radical tool, and in connection with creativity, with what I do as a filmmaker and a musician. I've always just turned to creativity as a source of externalizing some of what's happened and being able to connect with people and validate and affirm our experiences. So the future for me is a lot of healing. It's a lot of revisiting wounds from our experiences and trying to create solves that feel good and actually create spaces for us to be joyous, because we can be out here and doing what we do day in and day out. But I think to Hunter's point earlier about restoration, that piece is very important. And I'm very invested in that part of the journey moving forward. And I think there also needs to be this shift. Someone alluded to it earlier about, sort of how movements tend to be organized. And I think it was actually Qondiswa who referred to this idea of having organizing be a CV record or a tagline you can put on an email or whatever, which is something that we do, right? Like, to let people know what we do. Like, how else are we going to label ourselves as people, like cool people? But I think I'm seeing now I think the US specifically has a very real habit of individualizing an entire experience and trying to cherry pick the leaders of a movement and either villainizing them or heralding them as the founders, and then forgetting the experience that it's rooted in. So for me, I see movement building as something else entirely. I see it as something else that incorporates individual narratives and has space to hold the narratives of Black, queer people, trans people who often get silenced in these conversations, but not to the point where we're no longer able to like build around that. So I think a move away from individualized like focus and into a more of a collective reflection and healing space. And I do see a call for accountability and a reimagining of what accountability looks like. I think the US is too, like, because we're such a carceral state, there's all this language around, punitive measures as a means of organizing and sustaining revolution. And I don't see that as a way. Like, I don't think we can keep doing that. Meanwhile, we do have things that we need to do in terms of holding people accountable for what they do and the harm that they cause. I just wonder new models for how to make accountability something that they have to do and they have to opt into as a part of the movement, versus having to be forced to do it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's what I see.
Thank you so much, Kaz. Anya, you are muted.
Sure, I can step in. That was beautiful. That's tough to follow. I think the future is really in two parts, and I think that's because there are things that are short-term and things that are long-term, and I think there are things that are more concentrated, more local, and things that are more broad spectrum and still very important. In terms of academic institutions, and I mean that like across the board. I want to be a teacher, I want to be an educator, and so it's really important, I think, in general, but particularly in higher education. I think there needs to be more transparency. I think that I lean towards socialist if it hasn't been clear already. And I just think that the way the institutions run our school is run like a business, and it's bullshit. I think it's ridiculous. I don't understand why our university needs to be run like a corporation. You know, I think it's silly. You're extracting money. You're extracting, trying to extract intelligence and trying to extract culture from people, and to claim it as your own. And people graduate, and people that they have villainized graduate, and then they say, "Oh, look at what this person did. Look how amazing that they are. Look at our alum. We're so proud of them," when they were the ones that were radical when they went to school. And I think that what's crazy about it is everything we learn in school, we then turn and say, hey, we just learned about how these systemic racism and oppression works. And we kind of notice that this school is doing the same thing. So we're going to talk about all the ways that we can fix that. And then they're like, oh my God, you weren't supposed to do that. Of course, you're supposed to learn about it, but you weren't supposed to like turn on us. You know what I mean? So I think that ultimately, the problem is in the structure. And I agree with you, Mbali. I 100% agree, because I really think that the system works exactly as it's supposed to. It's not that it's broken. It just doesn't work for us. We live in an institution that was never made to recognize us. So we come and now we're their trophies, and we're not supposed to fight or talk back or do any of that. And so I think that transparency, also student participation in the structure of the institution, changes the game. Us being able out how to help us. And it's a lot of work. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's part of the job. We're learning to do it in school. People that are studying design and management, people that are studying all of these things about how institutions work. Why are they not participating in the conversations that make our institution work? I think that on a university level is what I want to see, and protection of those students, not just throwing them to the wind because they're not useful anyways. They're not, because they become disposable. I think that has to end. But in a broad spectrum, in a broad scope, I think it does need to be about accountability and reform. It also needs to be about creativity and this lack of stiffness, this college shirt kind of crap that we're going through right now, in which there needs to be more artwork. I want murals everywhere. I want the Mexican muralist movement to come back. I want to see artwork, because artists look at the world through a different lens, and we need help looking through a different lens right now, because we are certainly trapped in all the kind of bureaucracy and all the stoic nature of a business, and we're not a business anymore. I don't think that we can do that anymore. I think we're going to get stuck, and I think we're going to end up losing ourselves if we get caught up in all the numbers and the bureaucracy, and did we make enough money? Because why do we pay for education in this country? Sidetracked. I'm not going to get into it because I'll go on forever. But why do we pay for education in this country? Why do we pay for healthcare? Why are we paying so much to live? That doesn't make any sense. So I think that ultimately we have a lot of work to do, because we're upending and reorienting power. And it's great. It's just hard. It's needed, but it's difficult. And so I want to see us take up space, because right now we're at the very first step, and that is visibility. It is being in the streets. It is being in the workroom. It is getting education, because this generation, the people that are on this call, we are going to get to make the shots. This is my first primary election. I've never voted in a presidential election before. This is the first one. So I hear you. I'm with you. I see you, Mbali. I know what that's like. I missed the last election by I think I was cut off by a couple months or whatnot. This is it, and as much as I don't believe that the system is for us, I believe we can play the game better than anybody else can, because we know why it doesn't. Now we just need the power to do it.
Amazing.
Okay,
well said. Well said. Hunter, your turn.
Well, I wish she was I don't know what I'm going to say, and then dropped all of that. I love that. Well, so yeah, I just have a couple things that I want to share and add on. I mean, everything that Cost and Anya just said really is sitting with me. And also, I just want to say that I think in thinking of the future, I'm thinking about, even just on this call, each of us, all six of us, of what we've shared and how we've kind of come to it. I think all of that's what's going to be needed. So Qondiswa talking about the sort of like learning in the past and doing what you need to do in the past. But I think in many ways, what I heard from what you were sharing is also passing the torch and having that intergenerational connection. Like Mihla talking about the legal action. I think it's something that I'm like not versed in, but I've always been curious about, of like sort of working within what's already there to use to our benefit. And in Mbali talking about, student organizing, I think that's what most I've experienced with, and what those of us in the States have experienced with, but seeing all of those different aspects. And I think so for me, I think I very much see like the continuing of all of them. And I think that's what also gives me a lot of inspiration. And I think in the days where it's hard and it's like, is this always what it's going to be? And are we actually going backwards? Are we actually making progress? I think conversations like this to see that where we're coming from is what is sustaining. And then as far as talking about vision going forward, and I also, due to your point about education, I think is integral to that to me. Like, I think something after going through what I went through at the new school, something that came to me and what I kind of articulated is like this work of sort of community making and collectivity in very much many ways is life work, it's life sustaining work, but I think also for the people who are doing it, if it's allowed to be, it's also death work because it requires such a huge toll from you that's not always restored. And so I think when I think about the future, I'm thinking about how do we ensure that the disposability that Anya's talking about or mentioned isn't what's natural. Because I think something that I learned even talking to a Black staff member of the new school who's been at that institution for, at this point, I think over 20 years. In the 90s, there's a huge uprising on the campus called the Mobilization. And she was sharing with me that students went through the same thing that I was. This isn't new. None of it's new. It's like what Anya was talking about, the sort of transition of students that makes it seem as if it is. And so I think for me, that's where I'm, like a mentor a long time ago was telling me like, your success is only as good as the doors that you open for the people behind you. And so I think as a youth worker and as a sexuality educator, being in this kind of unique position to illuminate and change radically how education functions and what really it means. I think for me, I don't really think of being an instructor or a teacher. It's more about how do we kind of confront all this basic, terrible, really violent things that just seem normal, whether that be how we understand our own identities, others' identities, movements, where movements came from, who led those movements, and how do we integrate that into our current lives and our current sort of understandings of one another. And so I think when I think of, the brighter days or the silver lining, it's really through understanding ourselves and being able to contextualize that in the past and also use that for the future. I think also even like I'm from a very white city that I fled the first opportunity I got. But with these uprisings, I've gotten the opportunity to work with two friends to kind of do a project out there for Black youth. And so much of what we're talking about is there's so much history, Black history specifically, from the beginning. Black people have been, like, there is no United States without Black labor. There is no innovation. There's no nothing without us. That includes our white city that, there's a popular show of it here that makes it seem like this white utopia. That's specific, but that doesn't mean we weren't there. We were there before many of the white people who ended up moving there later. And so holding on to that history and allowing it to sort of give us that confidence, and also the keys. There were so many things that they were doing to sustain life when lynching was legal. And it was in a very different context that it still occurs today, but in a very different context in some ways. We can learn from that and that we can pass that going forward. So I think, documentation and education is that vision for me. And also, one thing I want to add just for if new school people watch this, Anya, you were talking about how the new school locks the POC space, the students of color space, for houselessness people staying there. I'm sure you remember this, when we were in meetings with administrators and buildings people to actually plan the blueprint of that space, it was within specific intention that we vocalized, because we'd had houseless people back then having to use the small storage space to store their things and to actually sleep there. And so when we told this to them, that we need more storage space because a lot of our people have to depend on this as the only safe space that they can keep it for free. So they knew that from the beginning, and I think it's really interesting that when the guard changed in terms of the older people who were around at the time, once they're out and graduated, now the script flips. And it's like, I think just an example of everything we're talking about in this selective memory. But I just want to note that. I just want to note that for new school people. Terrible.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for making time for this conversation. Like we said before, this is only the beginning of, the 6, 7 of us coming together and having this conversation. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to continue beyond this space. And unfortunately, we lost Qondiswa in our conversation, likely due to load shedding. But we can obviously connect with her post this conversation. And once again, we are live on Facebook and YouTube, and you can join the conversation with the hashtag Aluta Students Rising. Episodes and references will all be available on our social media platforms and archived on South African History Online. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook to keep up to date and where we can all continue the conversation. Luta Continua is an international dialogue series that brings together activists, revolutionaries, thought leaders, and community workers to have critical conversations about their experiences and the state of our world. Luta Continua.